50/50 and WCD came together for this initiative.
Thanks, Barb. Well, it's a pleasure to see all of you. This is so exciting, and I have to thank Barb and Sandy for doing an amazing job in putting these Zooms together. We weren't sure whether they were going to be successful, and they put incredible work and gotten Ruth and so many of you wonderful people as panelists to be involved to work with us. So I've always been concerned about women in leadership, and women in leadership on corporate boards has been sort of a pet peeve of mine, that we just don't have enough of them. And it turns out in Florida, not only do we not have enough, but using the Russell 3000 as our benchmark, we're at the bottom of the list. So among all the states that have enough companies on the Russell 3000 to measure, Florida is the last. And we have 24.5%, I think, of the board membership that's women here, and the average in the country is over 28%. And so I decided we ought to do an initiative, and there are 3 IWF chapters, International Women's Forum chapters in Florida, Florida Suncoast, which is the one I chair, Palm Beach and Miami. And we started talking about doing something and said, well, we need others to partner with us. And so we just called up Deborah Ellinger from WCD and Stephanie Sonnabend, who's a member of our IWF chapter, who is the co-founder and CEO of 50/50 Women on Boards. And everyone just said, yes, great idea, let's do it. And so we commissioned a research study that the University of Tampa did, our first annual, and we will have another one. We have a website. I think Barbara or someone put that in the chat, so you can go to our website and we will get better at updating it, but it has our research report. It has a lot of information on it. We are planning our second annual meeting, which we hope will be in November in the Miami Palm Beach area. And this is our second webinar, and what we're seeing is 2 things. We're working on 2 sides of the coin, helping educate women who want to be on corporate boards. Think about what it takes. We are not replacing all of the myriad of wonderful training programs out there. We are listing resources you can use, but we're just trying to be a support for those of you who have questions about this, and then lead you to others. We're not reinventing any wheels. And on the other side of the coin, we are helping those companies which don't have women on boards, and we have those that we call the zero companies. And there aren't too many left, but I think there are about 5 in Florida who don't have any women, and then the 1s and the 2s. And we are offering our services free of charge to help them connect with appropriate women to be on their boards. And we have a list, Deborah Ellinger, and Last Half Mile, I think it's called, has a list of about 750 corporate ready women. And she does a wonderful job of working with the corporation, talking to them about what they want. Lauren, we're not replacing search consultants, but we're just an extra helpful group out there to connect them and to show them that there are plethora of qualified women in the fields that they need. And we've already done one where we connected, they needed someone with FDA understanding and experience and some other unusual sets of characteristics. And Deborah was able to find them, I think, 3 people who met that bill. And so far, I believe since the last quarter, we've added 16. We haven't been responsible, but the boards in Florida have added 16 women. Our goal is to add 50 women to the boards, of which half should be women of color. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ruth or Barbara, and thank you all for joining us and being excited about this initiative. And networking is the important thing. Encourage those boards that you know to look to diversify their boards. The data all shows they're more profitable. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. I encourage you to go to the website when you have time, look at the research study, and there is a really detailed list, I think 50 things on there having to do with being on boards, getting on boards. It's everything you could possibly want. So for additional information, courses, whatever. And so with that, Ruth Brophy is going to be the moderator for today's session. And Ruth brings a breadth of experience from her prior role at HIG as CFO and CAO, and she's continuing to consult for them now. Also, Ruth brings her governance experience, and I've been thrilled having her on the Goodwill board, that she is an independent board member. She brings such knowledge, overall governance, but from a cybersecurity technology area. She actually launched this initiative for Goodwill, and she now chairs that committee, cyber and tech committee. So with that, I want to turn it on over to Ruth, and everyone I think is on mute, but we'll continue to monitor and what's going on in the background. Thank you. All yours.
Thanks, Barb. Appreciate the introduction. We really are very appreciative to our panel. We've put together a dynamite group of ladies, very experienced and have a lot to share. For the participants, thanks for attending. You're going to find that we do have a jam-packed agenda, and the pace is going to be very quick. So I'd like to start off. Diane, if you could start off introducing yourself, identify your currently sitting boards, years serving on boards, and area of expertise.
Thank you. Look at that. And I even remembered to unmute. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. So let's see. After about 20 years as a CEO in the marketing technology arena and also in an educational technology firm, I made the switch to doing boards for most of my time. So I'll just mention the boards that are particularly relevant to today's conversation. I'm on 2 public boards, Bright Cove, which is a streaming video company, and Eastern Bank, which people who live in the Northeast US know well. And my private boards are both large companies owned by private equity firms. One is Panera, which hopefully you all know. I joined Panera when it was a public company. We took the company private, and then they asked me to come back. And then also Schlesinger Group, which is a large market research firm. I'm also on a bunch of nonprofit boards. Let's see, my first corporate board experience was in the late 90s when I joined the board of Crabtree and Evelyn. And so I've been doing this for about 25 years. I guess all told, and this might be unusual, every one of my large corporate board positions came from my network. 2 were Harvard Business School classmates who were CEOs. 2 were from just professional networks in Boston like this. And 2 were from people that I had met in the industries where I was working. So that's my summary.
Super. Arlene is next.
Well, thank you all for having me on the panel. I'm a relatively new member of IWF, so it's great to see a number of my fellow IWF members here, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to meet you all in person. But I retired from Moody's Corporation in June of 2022. And I've sort of had board service in my transition plan, and really started working on actively to identify a board in the last couple of years. But couldn't do that while at Moody's, because if any of you are at financial services companies, you'll know that there's a significant barrier in terms of conflict of interest. But I was appointed to my first board while at Moody's in November of 2021, and that board was Compass Group PLC, which is a FTSE 50 company. It's about 35 billion market cap and about 500,000 employees, and they operate around the world. So that was significant in terms of my first board opportunity. And then since then, I've been appointed to Xenia Hotel and Resorts, which is a REIT. Earlier in my career, I assessed REITs, and so had that background. Xenia has a portfolio of 35 luxury hotel and resorts in the United States. It's relatively small. It's about a $2 billion market cap, but it is publicly traded on the NYSE. And then finally, I was appointed to the board of Equitable Holdings in July of 2022. Equitable Holdings, as I think you all know, is an insurance company, but they also have a 65% ownership interest in AllianceBernstein, so highly regulated industry. My expertise is in finance. I'm a CPA and a CFA, have been a CEO at a small company prior to my 24-year career at Moody's. The other thing is around capital access, especially credit, given sort of my 24-year history there. I've run large P&Ls, both in the US and in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And I think more recently, what has been instrumental is that I developed and executed a successful enterprise-wide ESG strategy for Moody's in my last operating role.
Terrific. Lauren Smith.
Yes, well, hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm also a relatively new member to IWF. So I'm Lauren Smith, and I have been in executive search for over 20 years. I'm a managing director in the board practice of Diversified Search, which is a top 10 search firm in the United States. We launched almost 50 years ago, putting women into business roles before anybody had ever thought of that. So we really have a deep pioneering history in the diversity space. But I point out, we place white guys too. We're not limited to diversity placements, but we are known for we are known for developing diverse slates and work and having deep relationships in the areas of diversity, both in the management side and the board side. So I just got really passionate about the difference that a good board could make really early on in my search career, and so I've been involved in doing corporate board searches almost 20 years, but the last 5 years have found me focusing on it. So that is what I do now, are just corporate boards. And as a part of my commitment to great governance, I'm also a National Association of Corporate Directors certified director and a board leadership fellow. I'm the past president and current chair of governance for NACD Florida. And I'm just really passionate about multifaceted diversity, and I am very committed to helping boards grow strategic asset boards, and they've got to look at that from all different angles. And so great to share experiences with you today, and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Lauren. We have another Lauren Valiente. She's our panel.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So my name is Lauren Valiente. I joined my first public board in June of 2021. I'm on the board of HCI Group. It's a publicly traded property and casualty insurance company headquartered in Tampa, Florida. By trade, I'm an attorney. I specialize in securities enforcement and regulation compliance, been advising boards and their officers and directors for many years on both securities regulatory issues and compliance issues, and in part of our ESG practice at my firm. The way I echo the way I found my board seat was also through personal networking. I happened to meet the company's COO on a trip that I took with the Chamber of Commerce to Washington, D.C., and got to know her. When we got back, she reached out to me and told me about my company has a board observer program where they pick 2 people every year to sit on the board as observers, and it really is created to very purposefully to create a pipeline for their board, specifically targeting diverse candidates. It's a wonderful program, and we usually start looking at candidates in the summer. I'll circulate more information about that when we get to that point, but can't recommend it highly enough. But then I was lucky enough, I completed my 1-year term as an observer, and a seat opened up the following year, and was very, very happy to join the board. In addition, I'm a member of WCD, and a group of 9 of us from the Central Florida chapter this year founded the Women of Color Pipeline Initiative. With respect to women of color, from the latest data gathered from 50/50 women on board suggests that there's only 50 women of color serving on Florida public boards. That's in the entire state. So we very much want to move the needle there. So we've created a program where we pick every year. We picked our first cohort for this year, and they're currently in the program. We provide a 6-month-long program that's geared towards board-ready women of color executives, aimed at giving them the tools to navigate the search process. and then helping them make connections and broadening and especially connections with decision makers and people that are currently on board. So I'm very proud of that program, and invite every, if you know, if you're a candidate or you know of candidates, please let us know. We'll probably pick our second class in the fall of this year.
Thanks, Lauren. As you can see, we have a fantastic panel. The focus of our panel will be on large publicly held companies and large private companies. So that's what we used as a basis for this agenda. Our main topic we're going to cover today, the topics are personal preparation before you start the launch, and then the launch of a search. As far as personal preparation, we're going to cover a couple of topics. Let's start off with Lauren Smith. Lauren, can you start off explaining the difference between a board profile versus a typical job-related functional resume?
Sure. And I think you need both. And I also think you need a killer LinkedIn profile. So all three of them, it's not, not an either or. So the board bio is often used as a teaser. So it is sent to get people interested in you. It includes your photo, and it's really a highlight document that includes a few of your noteworthy accomplishments. A bio is not meant to be a summary of every job you've ever had, but kind of a summary of your overall work experience. And it should capture the essence of who you are. What sets you apart? Don't be afraid to use some adjectives that you carefully chosen, right? You don't want to sound like a commercial, but what you're known for. And it should almost sound like somebody's introducing you that knows you and drawing out the things that make you special. So that is a board bio should get people interested and excited about you. The board resume should list everything in chronological order like you're used to, except having a resume that's ready for the board process. You should take another look at what you have on there. It should really summarize your key accomplishments and your key responsibilities versus listing every task you've ever had. Sometimes people will just have their very first resume and they just keep adding on to it. They never go back to say, hey, do I really need to tell somebody all the things I did 20 years ago? So make sure you bring it up to a level that speaks to the kinds of skill sets that you would be bringing into the boardroom. Ask yourself, could this bring value to a board? And if so, leave it on your resume. And I think we're going to talk more about a LinkedIn profile, but that's really critical, because when we're presenting candidates, even if we give them a write-up, even if we give them a bio, even if we give them a resume, as soon as we say their name, they're off looking on the LinkedIn profile is one thing. Secondly, people will find you, whether it's a search firm or a nom-gov committee or somebody who's interested in getting somebody onto the board. Having a solid LinkedIn is really important, and you should have a great professional current photo. That's my plug for LinkedIn. So have a couple colleagues look at it and make sure it captures all these documents. Should capture the essence of who you are, and get honest feedback. And I mean so I think when you think about the documents you need, it should be the package of all three.
Thanks, Lauren. Great points. Next, we have Diane Hessen. Diane, can you cover the importance of understanding your current personal persona and brand?
Sure, I'm happy to start out here. In terms of brand, just think of yourself as a product in a very competitive space. I mean, we all think we have these great, rich experiences, great background, et cetera, but it's like you and everybody else. I mean, I get multiple calls and emails a day from people saying, I really want to be on a board and I've got this great marketing background and I'm sure I could help any consumer packaged goods company, but there are so many people doing that. So it really is an exercise, especially if you have a marketing background. It's an exercise in positioning yourself, in looking at what makes you unique. Is there a particular industry? Is there a particular part of function that you feel like you have real expertise in? If you know a lot about cybersecurity, you're done, because every board is looking for cybersecurity experts. I was listening to Arlene. Arlene's was great because, she can basically say, if you're not interested in ESG, then you probably don't need me on your board. But at least 50% of boards out there are desperate for help with ESG. And on top of it, if she's been a CFO and can also be on and potentially even chair an audit committee, then those are really attractive things for boards. I think part of this, I call this finding your lane. We all have lots of things we can do. I've run companies. I can read a balance sheet and an income statement, but I'm not a finance person. Like for me, I'm more of a go-to-market strategy person, sales, marketing channels, et cetera. That's where I can really help and give examples. And what I think you should start to do is, one on LinkedIn, when Lauren was talking about that, I totally agree about LinkedIn profiles. And, I'm guilty of that. I hear about a potential candidate for something, I immediately go to LinkedIn. But one of the reasons that I do that is I want to know if anybody who I know knows that person. So if someone says, gee, Lauren Smith would be a great board member, I'm going to go and find out, do I know anybody who she's connected to? If I know no one, that would be weird, especially if I live in Florida. It's a Florida company. She's here. We're both professional women. I don't know anybody who knows her. That's weird. And very often you get 30, 40, 50 people that you have in common. And you think, all right, this person is kind of in the arena. What I would also do if you need help with this is start creating an inventory on a spreadsheet of everyone you know who is on a corporate board. And I will tell you that every single one of those people will be sitting in a room in the next year or two and hearing that there's an opportunity to add someone to their board. And if you want to be on their radar, and it's not about calling the person and saying, hi, I know you're on a board. It's just, knowing that because most of the time, if you're a board member and there's an opening, it's a plus for you to be able to say, you know what, I have a name for you. That you might be really, really interested in. So in particular, networking with and getting advice and help from people who are already your friends who have made it onto corporate boards is just a great thing to do to start building your brand.
Thanks, Diane. The next step, we're going to assess your profile and understand what type of board seat would be a good start given your expertise and experience. Arlene, could you lead us off on that discussion?
Certainly. So Diane mentioned a number of aspects around the importance of networking, but I would also suggest that even before you undergo that, you should be aware of it, but even before you actively pursue the networking, it's incredibly important that you have sort of defined your profile, what's unique about your experiences, and expertise, and what value you can bring to a particular board. So in my case, I'd mentioned that I had been very intentional about transitioning from corporate to board service, and was really honed in on it over the last, say, 24 months. But in reality, I started my preparation for board service probably a decade ago. And was very intentional about the opportunities I sought in my career to not only ascend to the C-suite, but also that would be valuable in the board context. And so, not that you have to have done that for the past 10 years, but I think you need to be uniquely aware of what are the things that you have done that would resonate with a board. Today's boards, I believe, unlike they were yesterday, where they were seeking many people with CEO experience, are now looking for more diverse skill sets. And diversity is important in the board context for a number of different reasons. It's important to have ethnic diversity, gender diversity, but skill set diversity is also incredibly important, especially as we move into a more sort of regulated environment around governance. And so while you may have worked for 20 years in consumer packaging goods, for instance, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to find a board opportunity in the same industry. In fact, you may be able to better position yourself outside of that industry because you may have some skill sets that are unique to something like financial services, for instance. But I think it's important to think about your profile as it relates to how do you add value. So even as you're thinking about your board profile and you're describing sort of some of the things that you've accomplished, for me, it was important that I linked that to the creation of value in the organization, because at the end of the day, the responsibilities of a board is really oversight of strategy, execution, and risk management in order to drive value for that organization. And if you can sort of describe that in the context of the roles that you have currently had, I think that's a great way to sort of approach the profile.
Thanks, Arlene. We have Lauren next, and Lauren, we'd like to understand the key areas of preparation, basically is to understand your personal legal implications when accepting a board position. Could you give us some insights into how we should look at that?
Sure. Yeah, and one thing everybody should understand is that with any board position, you are assuming a certain amount of legal, personal legal risk, and so these aren't decisions that should be taken lightly. And certainly, I this is what I do for a living, so it's not, when things go bad, you see directors get named in civil lawsuits. When then things go really bad, you have potential criminal liability. And so just it's a situation you want to make sure you understand what your legal responsibilities are, your duty of care and your duty of loyalty. And then you want to do your homework, and not just once kind of a company has expressed interest in you, the two main questions you need to answer is, how am I right for that company? How's my skill set right for that company? And how is that company right for me? The first question, it's really a matter of, I think a good piece of advice that I always give everybody is, and the good thing about public companies is there's so much information that's publicly available that's really helpful. If you either go on their website or you go on EDGAR, which is the SEC's website that has all of the company's public filings, one of the best resources is their proxy statement that the company issues every year in advance of their annual meeting. Usually, what I advise people to do is get the proxy. The proxy will list the current directors and their backgrounds. And kind of as you read through that, ask yourself, what skill set is currently missing from the board that I can add to? So try and kind of figure out, where can you plug in? What kind of expertise do you have that the company needs that isn't already covered by the current board members? Take a look, it also in the proxy statement, if you look at the executive compensation section where they talk about how they compensate the CEO, that's a good, that'll give you an idea of what metrics are really important to the company, what they're currently kind of focused on and watching, who their competitors are. Then, of course, if you look at their financial filings, so public companies, they file their financial disclosures every quarter, and the year end, the quarterly statements for the first, second, and third quarter are the 10 Qs, and then the year end is the 10K. And the 10K is if you look at the 10K, that's going to have the most information. If you look at the risk section, that usually is a parade of horribles. So the companies, in order to be compliant, they list every single risk that could possibly arise with the company. So, don't let that scare you off. But it's a good reading the risk section. It's a good way of getting an idea of what issues a company kind of contends with, and what issues are being discussed in the boardroom. So I think that'll give you a lot of good nuggets of information as well. And then take a look at in any investor decks, and look at what the market is, what Wall Street is saying about the company, and any analysis you can find on on the company is really helpful. But there's so much information, but that is to say, kind of use that information to answer those two questions. What skill set can I bring to the company that's not already covered? And then the second question, is that company right for me? You just want to be cognizant, and this will come not just from the public information, but when you go in for your interview or talking to the other board members and the senior executives, you want to make sure, is the company on solid footing? You know, what are the issues that they're facing right now? Does this look like it's a healthy board that's functioning in a healthy way, or does this look like a rubber stamp board that just does whatever that CEO wants? And so you want to kind of get a sense, certainly, of kind of how healthy the company is, and does it seem like, you know, this feels like the right fit.
Great, thanks, Lauren. We're going to start off now delving into the major topic of marketing yourself to serve on these type of boards, otherwise known as the launch process. Our panel believes that candidates should consider using all these techniques: recruiting firms, personal networking, and targeting companies where you can add value during your pursuit. So Lauren Smith, could you kick us off on giving us some insight on how the recruiting process works? How can we best leverage recruiting firms in our journey for the board seat?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think, as we've already heard from the panelists, you know, recruiting firms are not the only way into the boardroom. As a matter of fact, we're probably used, you know, less than half the time. The larger the company is, the more likely they are to use a search firm. I thought I'd tell you what we do as a search firm, because if you do get a call, understanding where they are in the process and what's going to happen might be helpful. So when we get a search, we work with the board to create a specific requirement for that seat that's being filled, and you know, we create a position description that should identify that impact, that value added that the board is looking for. And then we go out, and our firm has a very inclusive process of doing outreach, talking to potential sources about ideas they might have for candidates. We leverage people that we know, and we also do original research where we identify, gee, our client really wants somebody to come out of a fast-growing retail space. So let's look for a board member and executive from Panera, for example, you know, and then we'll go and find out, gee, of the people that are out there who might be interesting for us for this specific board. So that's how we generally create a calibration list or a long list, and then we work with the client, usually it's the nom-gov committee and the CEO, to identify which of those candidates would add the most value, and then we go out and start speaking to candidates. That doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes boards only want to talk about candidates that have already expressed interest. So as you go through the process, trying to asking the question, has the company already seen my background, or are you suggesting my background to them? What will help you identify where the search firm is in their process. And so then, you know, once we've identified the candidates that are interested, we interview them. We recommend kind of a shorter list that should be moved forward. Typically for board searches, we present 2 to 4 candidates for a search, and these are candidates that are qualified, they're interested, we think they're a good cultural fit, and then the nom-gov committee and the CEO often will interview those and often make a decision that then gets recommended to the full board. So once you know, and sometimes those are done in person, and with the used to be they were all done in person, right? But with the pandemic, a lot of these are happening virtually. And I mean, during the pandemic, I actually had candidates go through the whole process online, attend all the board meetings online, sell the company, and never got on a plane and been actually where the company was located. So I mean, that's a little unusual, but I think, you know, I think the world is changing. So there, I think depending on the company and the situation, you may be it may be things that happen in person, or it may be things that happen online. The other thing that we really dig into are references. So thinking about who your professional references are, people that have spoken, people that can talk about your professional, your professional track record that's recent, really within the last 3 or 4 years. Those are the kind of references that we're looking for. And we typically talk to 4 or 5 references before a candidate gets finalized in the process. So some in the past, when a search firm was involved, many firms would tell you it was like a 6 to 12 month process. Our firm has always been, I think, more nimble and moved more quickly. But I would say it in many cases everybody is sped up. So it might take a few months, 3-4 months for a process, but you need to remember that there are some processes that could drag on, and just because it's been 6 months doesn't mean that you're no longer in the mix. It could just be that that they're taking their time, there are changing dynamics on the board, and hopefully whoever the search firm is that you're working with will keep you updated along the line. So that's just a little bit kind of behind the curtain of how a search firm works. I would say we are guilty of the fact that it's hard to get our attention if you are not a good fit for a current search, because we work for the companies and we've got a lot of mandates and are looking for a lot of very, very specific profiles. So I know that sometimes, you reach out to a search firm and it can be frustrating that you're not getting either they're not getting a response or they're not willing to, have a personal conversation with you. But I think your goal should be to try to get into the database and to have touch base points, maybe quarterly, just to say, hey, I'm still looking. If you have any thoughts for me, doing it in a way that's not every time you're asking, when can we meet? When can we meet? When can we meet? Because that, oftentimes the search professional may not have the time to meet with you, and that's just going to make them feel bad. So, touching base with them, I think, on a quarterly basis is probably about the right cadence. And just because you don't get a response doesn't mean that you haven't been put into their database, right? So getting in the database and getting them to consider you for future board opportunities is really your goal in engaging with search firms. And during the question and answer, be happy to further expand on that.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. The next topic is building your network. We believe it's one of the most important steps in procuring a board seat. We're going to ask each panel to share their secrets on building and the benefits of a personal network. Diane, can you kick it off?
Sure. Well, I think I've already given you the hint on this, but for me, there's nothing more valuable, including your work experience and your degrees and everything else. There is nothing more valuable than having a great network of people who can help you, advise you, connect you. This is not just the case for boards, but for boards, it's invaluable. So let's just look at the math. I'm on 4 corporate boards, and just before we had this meeting, I decided to just kind of do an inventory. In the last 5 years, just those 4 boards have added 13 members.
Wow.
Sometimes it's, we all complain. I know, women sit around and we go, well, there are term limits and there are never any openings. But it was surprising to me that every one of those boards had openings. Sometimes, right now, for instance, I need to help my board find a woman or a person of color in the Northeast who has extensive experience in banking. That's what we're looking for, which leads me to the second thing, which is it's not, are they hiring a search firm or are they doing it through networking? So this one that I just told you about, a search firm has the search. But even if, for instance, Lauren's firm Diversified has the search, they're always interested in suggestions that other board members have for candidates. In fact, it's a huge help. So net, I have had 13 opportunities to suggest board members, as has everybody else, who's on boards. And if I know you, I'm just more likely to suggest that they check you out. I go onto LinkedIn, I write down, banking, I do my filter. I say, who are my first connections? I reach out to people and, say, do you know this person? He, she sounds really interesting. or whatever. And if I can help, it's amazing. I'm a hero to be able to find somebody that becomes a board member. And of course, how do you do this? I don't think this is about meeting women and say, hi, Ruth, you don't know me, but I want to be on a board. And I heard you moderate this panel. It's just about making friends. I mean, join NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. Go early to the meeting, network, drink coffee with people, do a favor for someone, sit on a panel, sit next to somebody at dinner and start a conversation. It's hard. We're so used to COVID now. It's sometimes you just want to stay home at the end of a day and watch White Lotus, but don't do that. Like, go to the events. And I was thinking back in the very beginning of this call, one of you was going, hi, Kate. Hi, Kathy. Oh, hi, Lisa. Hi, Danita. How are you? I mean, if you are from Florida, and I know not all of you are, but if you're from Florida and you don't know anyone on this call, you have work to do. So join, participate, help. I joined IWF Palm Beach because I live in Palm Beach Gardens. Less to be on a board and more because you never know. And, my first meeting, I'm having a glass of wine. I say to somebody, hi, how are you? She says, my name is Sandy. I said, Sandy, hi. She says, where are you from? I said, well, I used to live in Boston. Now I'm in Florida. And Sandy said, oh, well, I'm on the Babson College Global Advisory Board. I said, you're kidding. And we were off to the races. And now she's my friend. So it's all of those connections. We've all been around long enough to have people in common and to be able to do that.
Thank you, Diane. That was terrific. Does anyone on the panel have some other comments on networking?
Sure. Lauren, just two recommendations on our website, on the Women on Boards website. The link is in the chat. There's a list on that website of different groups out there that help women find board seats. There's a lot of groups that are really helpful. I mean, personally, at the Latino Corporate Directors Association has been phenomenal. They're very active. But there's so many groups. So kind of explore. There's one group that's specifically for women attorneys. So there's, find a place that'll help you connect to people because those groups can be very effective at that. Again, your target is to try and meet other people that are currently on public boards. And then be very targeted about it. You should kind of, as part of your homework and as part of the process of building your board bio, start identifying, think about the types of companies that you aspire to be on their boards, or you think you would be on the right fit for. Look at LinkedIn, try and figure out if you know anyone who's connected to any of the current board members, and see if you can get an introduction through if your connection can help introduce you to someone who's on the board. So LinkedIn is a very valuable tool to see kind of where you may have connections or common connections to people.
So the one other thing I would suggest is around the importance of the networking. So, Lauren mentioned the different organizations. I think it's important that you participate and be very explicit that you desire to be on a board and the kinds of boards, and also provide people with sort of in your discussions what you think your particular value add is, so that they can talk about you when an opportunity arises. The one thing I would also mention is in the 3 boards that I've been appointed to, in all cases, search firms were involved. But I would also say my networks were instrumental in getting me to the search firm, or in one case, actually, the search firm called me, presented me to the company. They moved away from me. And then they came back, and they came back because they said, everyone we talked to has said that we have to talk to you. And so that was the Compass board, and they actually came back to me, and instead of adding 1 director, they added 2. So I do think the network is incredibly important. And from a search firm perspective, it's important to include the search firms in your networking and get to know them, as Lauren said, not necessarily when they're in the midst of a search, but just be very intentional about getting to know them, but doing so in a way that's not a hindrance or a burden to them.
And I want to make one slightly nuanced build on what the other panelists have said. And that is, like, in your networking, if you tell somebody kind of specifically what kind of board might be both of interest to you and where you can add value, it's going to make a light bulb go off in their head. So
Yeah.
yes, it's like, where can you have an impact? I'm looking for, a growing company in the insurance space, or I'm looking for a turnaround in retail because I really feel like that would, could really leverage my passions and my interests. And then people be like, oh, I know a CEO of a turnaround in retail. I mean, so by stating your intention in a way that that can help people help you.
Yeah, and I've got one more thing, Ruth,
Okay.
that Lauren made me think of, and that is, if you have somebody that you're already connected to, it's absolutely fine to say, you know what, Ruth, I'm just starting to think about boards and I've got a board bio. Would you take a look at my bio and let me know what you think? Like, is this totally, is this horrible, or does it make me sound interesting? And if the person already knows you, I mean, I've looked at board bios for people I don't know. I kind of look at it, it's generic. I say it's fine. But if I know the person, not only am I able to help them make it better, but I also now have it in my head that this is somebody who might be a candidate for a board.
Excellent. You can really tell these folks have mastered networking, and they're continuing to network while they're on their current boards. Another pursuit is to target companies where you believe you can add value. The panel is going to share their views and experiences. Arlene, can you kick this off?
Certainly. So I think we've talked a lot about this already, but what one interesting point is that when I initiated sort of my board transition, my company actually hired an organization to work with me to identify boards that I was interested in that may have open opportunities. And while I think the process was very helpful in terms of helping me develop a board profile, helping me coach through board interviews, because they're not like job interviews, but that's another story. It's really more, you've got to be in a position where you're thinking about it as a bilateral conversation, right, versus a job interview. But I would also say that it forced me to think about the kinds of companies that I was interested in, and not just in the context of industry, but and Lauren hinted at this, but also the sort of culture that you are interested in. Because I often describe it as a board, being on a board is like the process you go through to determine if you should get married, right? Because it's nuanced, you're at the table, there's certain times you gotta lock arms around something, you gotta trust the people that are sitting at the table with you, because the reputational and legal risk is real. And so it just, as you're thinking about profiles, and Lauren talked about sort of how to identify some of the risks of an organization, but it is incredibly important that you try to assess what the culture of that organization is.
Terrific. Anyone else on the panel comments on that topic of targeting? All right, we're going to move on. So you have someone expressing interest in your candidacy for a board seat. How do you proceed? Lauren Valenti, can you start us off on some considerations?
Sure. Yeah, no, and this is a lot of what I covered before. So, the overriding question again is, how do I fit with this board? How do I add value? That's the question, is how do you add value to the board? And then is this board right for me? So again, I won't repeat everything I said before, but again, it's just a matter of looking at the public filings, really kind of getting a sense for the board. If people that are on the board already, talk to them, try to kind of figure out. The one thing I would say, I think a lot of kind of the most common mistake I think people make when they're searching for boards, when you come from an operational background, it's a very different mindset with to what you are required to do on a board. On a board, you're there for strategic oversight. And so I think if you have an operational background, kind of your first instinct is to get in and kind of second guess and maybe micromanage operations. And that's a big no-no. And when companies are interviewing for board members, that's kind of the first red flag they look for, somebody who is going to be kind of overly involved on the operational side. What boards really are looking for is high level strategic thinkers and high level kind of strategic oversight. So don't kind of fall into the trap of getting too bogged down in operations, because that's not really your role. So that's the other big piece of advice I would give.
Yeah, and just building on that, I think that can play out in the interview process, that if you're asking very operational, very detailed questions, it may flag to the company that you really don't understand the difference between management and board roles, and you don't understand that it's kind of nose in, fingers out, and they're really looking for you to ask very strategic questions during that interview process.
Absolutely.
Terrific. We now have 6 minutes till the end of our session. We're going to devote that time to questions. I don't see that we have any questions in the chat. So does anybody?
Actually, Ruth, we do have one that's came in.
Okay.
Let's talk about board certifications. Is there an expectation of board certifications? Are they of value? There are a lot of programs available. Some very specialist, some more general. Talk about that. Are they worth it?
Well, I'll jump in from a search firm's perspective. I would say they are not necessary, but they can be a differentiator, both in the interview process and probably even more importantly, in the boardroom. If you get trained, going through a process, what you learn will make you a better director. So I encourage people to consider finding the right program for them, because it will make them a better director.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think I've ever asked anybody if they're board certified, and I'm not. But it's great education. And I mean, I'll give you a classic example. If you haven't been a board member before, someone might say to you, which board committees do you feel that you would be most qualified for? Now, most public boards have 3 committees. They have audit, they have compensation, and they have nom-gov. If you say, well, gee, I think I'd be really good on an innovation committee or a strategy committee or whatever. I mean, what happens is you come across as not knowing how boards operate.
Right.
So what you want to answer is, I'd love to be on audit because it helps me understand a lot about the company, or I mean, you want to know that. So if you're certified, you're just much more educated about how to have the conversation to begin with.
I agree.
So we've talked a lot about things to do. Are there some things that we should not do?
This is Lauren. I think one common misconception that I run into a lot, nonprofit boards, unless you're on the board of a very large national nonprofit you're on the board of that national organization, being on a lot of nonprofit boards is not going to help you in your search for a public company board. So to the extent that kind of you may be thinking that is a way to credential yourself, being on a board of small kind of local community nonprofits, so it really isn't going to matter on the public level.
The other thing I would say about things not to do, and it's difficult, but as you're sort of going through the board process, I think it's important to really be intentional about what you want your portfolio of board service to look like. And it's going to be hard, but you don't necessarily have to jump at the first opportunity, because as I said before, it's a relationship, and it's typically a long-term relationship. And it's not something, at least from my perspective, that you can easily extract yourself from at a whim, right? And so being sure that you make the right decision about the board that you want to join is incredibly important. Not only for those reasons, but if you're building a portfolio, you should also know that typically the proxy advisors will vote negatively if you are more than I think 3 audit committees, and if you're on more than 4 public company boards. Now, there are always exceptions, but it just speaks to being very careful and selective about the companies that you want to serve on the board of.
Thank you. That's really helpful. A couple of the questions have come in. First one is, how does board compensation work? Give us some insights into that. And the next question we just touched on a bit was the cultural fit with the company and fellow board members.
So I'm happy to take compensation. You know, I always say to people, boards are a continuum. If you're on a nonprofit board, you pay them. If you're on a private company board, it depends on the size. If it's smaller and it's startup-y, you're not going to get a fee, but they'll give you usually stock options. And the stock options are somewhere between 1/4 and 0.5% of the total cap table. As you move up into larger private companies, the compensation can be similar to public companies, which is that you'll get, you know, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year in fees. Usually they pay you by the meeting, even though you're, you know, even if you have a board that's meeting 4 times a year, don't assume that you're only meeting 4 times a year. You have committees, you know, the shit hits the fan, right? You miss your earnings, or you don't, the CEO isn't performing, or you're doing a big acquisition, or you have an activist there. So many things that can happen. So it's very time consuming. But usually you'll get some combination of a fee with either restricted stock or stock options, you know, and the larger the board is, the higher the fee is.
Yeah.
And I would just say that you can find it all in the proxy. When you go in, every single company, a public company, you'll find it in the proxy.
Right. The one other thing I would say is for public company boards where the split is a cash fee as well as stock grants, usually you're required to hold those for a certain amount of time. But the thing that surprises a lot of people is that you still have to pay taxes on those stock grants. And so the way I think about it is the cash is to actually pay the taxes on the grants.
Yeah, sometimes you lose money sometimes in the short run. It's true.
Yeah, one other thing to be cognizant of too, and again, this is all in the proxy statement. There, you know, some boards, some public boards, they require all of their board members to hold a certain amount of stock, which is usually more than what you get as your normal stock grant. And usually people, you know, pay, you know, acquire that stock through their kind of salary or otherwise. So just be cognizant that you may also have an additional obligation to acquire a certain amount of stock over a certain amount of time. Also, kind of on the legal side, be very careful, because you want to be careful of insider trading issues. Anything you learn, a lot of what you learn in the boardroom is insider information. If you buy or sell stock while you have material insider information, you could get charged with securities fraud. So you can be very, very careful. Most board members have what's called a 10b5-1 trading plan. It's not an automatic protection, but it does bring you some protection. There was just a new rule this year that had imposed additional requirements for 10b5-1 trading plans to just make sure you kind of get good legal advice when you join a board, so that you're kind of set up in the right way and you don't get tripped up.
And Lauren, do we need a specialist attorney or our general attorney that we've used for other purposes?
You want an attorney who specializes in these 10b5-1 trading plans and in securities regulation. So you definitely want somebody with that specific expertise.
And
Thank
very
you.
often the general counsel in the corporate, in the corporation, is the, I just went through this with one where I'm chairman of the board, and I basically said to the GC, can you help us create some, can you help us give us some options for tax relief when it comes to all this? And he did the work. Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I didn't check with anybody else because I trust him.
So I'm very sensitive on time, and it's after 1 o'clock. So for those that do have to leave, I really want to thank the panelists and Ruth for the official session. And as I said, March 23rd, we have another one. And that actually will get into, I think, some of the things we were just talking about, of what it means to be on a board and some of the challenges that people don't think about. I'd like to, for anyone who wants to stay on, we're going to keep the Zoom open till 1:30 and we can continue this discussion. But I want to do an official thank you for the panelists and the moderator.
I definitely want to second that. And start thinking of your questions for the last session, which, as Barbara just explained, it will also cover what do board members really do? Diane mentioned, well, there's meetings and then there's all the extra meetings that show up. What do board members really do? So I feel like we kind of cut off the conversation in the middle.
What did you ask about culture, Sandy?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a question about assessing the culture. Let's just go back to the question. It was, how important was cultural fit with the company and with fellow board members in the process?
I'll start. For me, it was incredibly important for all the reasons I've articulated around sort of the role that you're playing. But acknowledging that it's difficult to sort of assess that during the period of a board interview. And so part of it is also, at least for me, it was talking to as many of the board members as possible to sort of get to know them, because it's not, and I mentioned this before, it's a bilateral conversation. And so it's not about you always talking about, the value you bring, et cetera, but also asking them questions around how the board operates, questions around, the encouragement to express a view, whether it's contrary to most of the board members, and really sort of trying to establish what kind of relationship does the board members have with each other.
Yeah, it's in our conversations, it's come up that sometimes you're listening to some of the subtleties of the conversations, things that they say to you that make you go, kind of like, I could give the example about, dating, where you just go, ew, I don't want to be friends with this person. I don't want to trust this person or be associated with them. So culture goes both ways, and you're just have your own sensitivities up about whether their culture fits you.
Correct.
Yeah, I would agree with Arlene. I think culture is critical. And I think that in the interview process, you should say, tell me a little bit about how you would characterize the culture of the board. And if you get to interview multiple board members, which you probably would, ask each person about that individually. Give me one word that describes the culture of the board. And it's amazing what you can learn. Having said that, I have a friend who's chairman of two. She's got a huge amount of board experience. And she has this saying, which is, if you've seen one, you've seen one. Basically meaning they are all so different.
Yeah.
They're different in terms of participation levels. They're different in terms of how much power the CEO decides he or she wants in the boardroom. If you're in a very large company and it's owned by a private equity firm, it's completely different than a public company. If it's a public company, optics matter. You have all these shareholders, you have a meeting, you're mostly meeting in the boring conference room at the corporation, eating ham and cheese sandwiches. If it's a private equity firm, they're like, let's go to the Ritz in Naples and play golf beforehand. Let's go to Aspen. I have a house there and we'll all meet. It's totally different. So that's fun. But in private equity firms, it's not a democracy. Right. So although you are a fiduciary, if there is a firm that owns outright 75% of this company, if they feel really strongly about something, no matter what I say, they're going to get their way. They just have more power. And I think you need to I think you need to deal with that and say, is it okay for me to be on a board where if I have really strong feelings about something, it's possible that no one will do anything about it. And, you learn that. And, if you like the investors and you think they're really smart, it's a different kind of experience, but they are all different. And I think that's why you have to talk to people who've actually sat in that room and see if you feel like you're going to be able to fit in.
Yeah, Ben, just picking up on Arlene's point too, on the importance of talking to all the board members. I personally think that's very, very important. I've heard of many instances where candidates that are interviewing for board seats, the initial proposal is that they're just going to talk to the board chair, the CEO, or the NumGov chair, and that's it. In that instance, don't hesitate to request and ask that you want to actually meet and speak to all of the board members.
Thanks. I'm so glad that Diane brought up private equity firms, because more and more companies are in fact owned by private equity. And so I'm going to actually turn this a little bit on its head, because of course, Ruth has a different perspective from all of her time at HIG. Things for us to be aware of, because there's just more volume of it now.
Sandy, shall I mention that I do serve on some of HIG's portfolio boards, and I've served